So, yeah, I was kicked out of 3 schools in a row, and I didn't like school. I didn't like the teachers, and I was doing graffiti, and messing around with my friends, I suppose, and also doing art, and I managed to get into a decent art school in London, but also got myself kicked out of there. But when I was 15, I was putting on shows with my friends of underground art, and showing digital art. We were showing like early pieces by William Latham and our own work as well, which was kind of, I suppose, sort of alternative kind of stuff. But I was very into the digital stuff that was happening as well. And so I had a computer and I had a modem, and I knew just as much as anyone else about the internet as a teenager, really. And so I started writing articles when I was 19 for the Guardian newspaper. And I also helped to launch Wired magazine in the UK. And the idea was, initially Wired was actually a joint venture with The Guardian, and it was supposed to be less the kind of libertarian capitalist ethos which was coming out of Silicon Valley at that time, but a more measured, slightly more socially aware, I suppose, or socially integrated kind of view of how these new technologies could help society. And so when I was working at The Guardian, the guy who was the head of the product development unit there, who later went on to create the BBC iPlayer and is now at the New York Public Library doing their digital stuff. He met me one day and gave me a job, basically, and gave me a desk space at The Guardian, and so I worked on some of The Guardian's earliest websites, just creating these websites on kind of different political issues. And yeah, when I was 20, I was made a contributing editor to GQ magazine, again writing about technology and youth culture and the future of war. They'd send me out to the US Army's National Training Center in Mojave Desert, and I would interview generals about what new technological means they were employing on the battlefield, and so I learned a lot about the potential for digital technologies, network technologies, for good and for bad, I suppose, from quite an early age. I continued working as a creative, designing interactive experiences, websites and various other things for brands, including Levi's and British Airways, and then later, Google and Barclaycard and various, like a lot of big clients. But the art making kind of went along with that. I was sort of continued to make art. Occasionally, I would be asked to be in a group show, so go over to Berlin or whatever and do that. And I was doing some abstract painting at the time, but I was also doing digital pieces. For example, based on Mars landscapes, imagery of Mars landscapes, which I would then edit into new compositions, kind of give them a sort of artificial order that was not there originally. Because, of course, these images, they're coming from so far away, and it's quite surreal, really, how you're even able to take a picture of something so distant. So I was finding ways to kind of play with that idea of, do you know that, is the image reliable or not? And then I was also this was about, this is 12 years ago now. I was also making 3D pieces where I'm taking photographic images from databases on the internet, so like royalty-free stock photography. So very kind of like a sunrise or a seascape, or people on a beach, or these very kind of typical sort of images, and then feeding them into this 3D software as height maps. So kind of really the wrong way of doing it. And then manipulating these images within the 3D environment, and you end up with these very, very strange, distorted, three-dimensional forms, which I was calling physical stock photos. So and then they could then be 3D printed or whatever. And some of them were 3D printed, quite a small scale because it was very expensive at that time. But yeah, I suppose I was always interested in engaging with technology and networked media in a critical way, to kind of look at the bad, the negatives as well as the positives. I mean, so I worked with brands for a long time, and I got very used to this idea of being kind of given a goal, a sort of a strategic communication goal, and you would make from that an interactive experience, or you would make from that a film or whatever, but it would always be based on the brand goal. And obviously over time this gets quite tiring, and so I became more and more interested in focusing on my own work, so I discovered the blockchain. I'd heard about crypto in about 2013, and then I was a bit put off by some of the kind of characters in the scene, but then I kind of returned to it in 2020 and started becoming interested again and learnt about NFTs. And it's a very difficult environment because there was a lot of hype and there was a lot of speculation, and it's very much kind of driven by, I think, social media viewing figures as well. So whatever is most popular on a social media platform will probably be popular as an NFT. But I also discovered some people working in that area that were kind of more underground or trying to do their own thing. And so I started looking into the blockchain as a technology, and I became very interested in, well, how could you look at the blockchain from a critical perspective? So how could you build artworks within that network that kind of mimic the behaviour of the network itself, but also reflect on that situation? I'd also been working with artificial intelligence since 2016 in my work and in various ways. So I kind of knew quite a lot about the way neural networks are structured and stuff. But so I was doing some artificial intelligence work as well, and with my AI art, I was more interested in how you could dig into the structure of the AI and find errors, and then make those errors the material for the artwork. It seems to me quite an interesting idea that information loss, data loss, image loss can really form the formal arrangement of an artwork. So I work with artificial intelligence quite a lot, and I returned to that kind of work recently. So I made 4 series of blockchain artworks, and each one of them engages with that kind of different realities and different circumstances of that network, of those networks. I'm very interested in networked art in general, actually. I think that there is a lot of potential to do more in the space of networked art. And I think it's kind of like an extension of Nicholas Bourriard's ideas around relational aesthetics. And I think the way that he defined relational aesthetics is that you can create art in the spaces between people's relations, and that art doesn't necessarily need to be overtly political, but that it can be a form of social resistance depending on how things play out, what the relations are, what the interventions are. And so I think there's still, and it's been happening in net art for a while, but I think there's still a lot of potential for networked art and for new relational media, online. So recently I started returning to AI again. I hate using the word AI because it seems to me like it's quite often used as a sort of a sales tool. And I'm not really sure that these algorithms are actually AI either, so I prefer to call them, machine learning or neural nets or something. But I do find, the technology is obviously incredibly interesting, and it's certainly going to become more and more important. I became more interested in, rather than just generating images with image generation models, to look at other kinds of machine learning models, AI models, neural networks, reinforcement learning models that weren't necessarily made for image generation, but were producing a visual output that maybe we don't necessarily see so often. So I became interested in this idea of making that visible. So as an example of this, we have image recognition models which are being used in CCTV networks so that computers can recognize different human faces or can differentiate between cars and humans, bridges, trees, different kinds of birds, and so on and so forth. And so I started training one of these models on a data set of imagery from the world, where it's in the process of learning to categorize things in the world. And I think what happens a lot of the time when these systems are being used is that the machine learning system gets to a point where it has enough of an accuracy of categorization that it becomes useful in terms of being able to build new systems, social systems, and commercial systems. And so people then deploy systems as a result of what these machine learning models have told them about the world. But there's always a problem with this, is that the models don't really provide a clear enough picture of the world. And they certainly don't include a lot of the subtleties of human experience. And so you get these systems which are quite alienating, I think. And so what I was doing is taking the output of these models, and there's a visual output that you can plug into some of these visual recognition AI models, where it creates a landscape, and the landscape is an image of how accurate the AI is performing at its task. So it's kind of like, it's called a loss landscape. And in a loss landscape, the lowest points in this mountainscape, the valleys, are where the AI model has done well at recognizing, this is a tree and not a bird, or this is a building and not a car. And the mountains are where the AI model has had highest loss, where it's been inaccurate. And so the model is in this constant process of performance optimization, and the loss landscape is an image of that, of it working towards a more optimized view of the world. So I thought this is very interesting, and I could use, the outputs, the mountainscapes, the lost landscapes, as the basis of an artwork. Turn that into a 3D relief, which is carved with a CNC machine, and then painted and with clear coat over it in a kind of spirit-based acrylic paint. So there's a sort of reflective quality to it. And what you end up with is a physical landscape of the inside of the AI model. And what you're seeing essentially it's an image of the act of visual interpretation. And I think there's a good politics to making that, which is usually invisible landscape, making it visible and putting it in the world and giving it a physical presence. But I also think it's interesting as a human, because of course we are also looking at these images and interpreting them. We're also in the act of interpretation, when we engage with any artwork, or when we engage with other people. So I've enjoyed exploring that area. There's another AI series that I'm working on, which is called Half Cheetah, this one again. I mean, it's probably even more technically complex than the lost landscape, and it's basically, it came to me that actually you could, because there's this kind of like almost like an arms race in AI technology. Who's going to got the latest model or the latest technology. And it's the same actually in art as well, I think, to an extent, that people are using these technologies in so many new ways that it becomes part of this overturning of, like, what's the latest thing. So I just thought, well, look, I can make my processes as complex as I like. It could have like 100 different steps and like just be completely unfathomably difficult to kind of comprehend. And so I started with reinforcement learning. It's quite amazing actually how these robots that they have now, that they're using in commercial and military systems, like quadruped robots, how they've made the process, again, like this process of efficiency, of driving efficiency. So before the reinforcement learning model starts actually using a physical body, it has an imaginary environment in which it can learn how that robotic body works. And there are different tasks that the reinforcement learning model can be given. It can be given quadruped tasks, and there's another series of tasks called Half Cheetah, where it's literally like it's a cheetah's body but only half of it. And it learns, the reinforcement learning model learns from scratch what is the most efficient way to use this body, which is actually very similar, I think, to the way that we that we learn to use our own bodies. And so we run the reinforcement learning model on Half Cheetah tasks. It takes quite a long time. Like a day you get something like 10 million steps or something. And over time you get, it kind of starts from a point of really, it's just really struggling, and it doesn't know exactly what to do with this body. It's flailing on the floor like a helpless baby. And then later in the process, it becomes more efficient, becomes more competent, and the model itself starts to resemble more like with a half cheetah model, but starts to resemble more of an efficient predator. And so it's quite amazing as you see this process of performance optimization. And because each of these outputs, if every step in the process can be output as a file that shows the model in the 3D environment, learning how to use this virtual body, you can then take these various behaviors and body motions and apply them to other kinds of models. And it just it so happens I found some websites where you can buy the 3D scans of people, who mostly models and actors who have sold the rights to their body scans online, and so they scan their bodies, and they then make the file size efficient by kind of taking away certain complexities and details and so on and so forth, so it's kind of easily downloadable. And so I'm taking these reinforcement learning model behaviors of this AI learning to work a quadruped body and then transplanting that into a human body. And so you have one data source which is coming straight from this imagined environment, and another data source which is obviously coming from the physical environment into people being scanned. Bring these two together in a live, real-time 3D environment where the behaviors, the process of performance optimization. So you then take all these elements and put them into a real-time environment where you can play out these different stages of activity in the process of performance optimization, but in a dynamic way. And so the point of the process that I'm at now is to get a second machine learning model to then turn that inwards on these behaviors and to say, okay, rather than let's organize these in a linear way from helplessness through to efficiency and high functioning, to break down that linearity and to say, well, okay, could we arrange these behaviors according to formal aesthetic principles, for example? So we're going to separate maybe the behaviors where the body is higher up from the behaviors which are lower down, and we'll, maybe dance between those two. Or, just you can really just break down the linear progress altogether so that 1 minute the model is running as efficiently as possible, and the next minute it's falling over and it's struggling again, and so the order of events of this process of performance optimization becomes broken down, and it's quite interesting because I think most people who have seen it, they talk about how when the model is struggling, they really want it to be able to get back up and start functioning optimally again. So it's an instinctive thing. But again, with this, I suppose my interest is more, it's trying to make this process of performance optimization visible and sensed in a way that is immediate, and so that as the logic of it and the linearity of that process breaks down, it starts to become almost meditative, because there's a kind of repetition in the bodily actions, the physical actions of working towards efficiency and then breaking down away from efficiency. And I find that very interesting, how when you break that process down, what it reveals, what it makes visible. I think that there's a lot of potential for network art, and because we're spending so much time in these environments anyway, that there's a need for media that doesn't just kind of fit into the engagement models of the algorithms of these very large social media companies, but that challenges it. And I think, there are many great artists that are working in this area. I think that there's a huge potential in networked art specifically because it can re-engineer the behavioural and relational dynamics of our online relationships, and so I would expect to see more of that, whether it be network games made by artists or other kinds of shared environments. Not to say there haven't been, but I think there's plenty more opportunities there. And for myself, really, I'm interested in trying to find ways to use technology at its cutting edge, to kind of push the limits of the technology, but instead of coming back with a discovery or just a kind of another innovation which then becomes part of this sort of obviously interesting process of progress, to return something that also challenges the direction that things are heading in, and hopefully make something visible in a way that is felt and can be sensed, even if there is a very complex technological framework behind it that may or may not need explaining.